And then I just want to say welcome. And before we begin, I want to say just a few words about the organization 3PDK, because this webinar is hosted by 3PDK, and this is a non-profit organization. Our purpose is to spread the understanding of the three principles. And this understanding is a spiritual understanding, and it's right now spreading all over the world, which is really amazing. The understanding of the three principles has helped people overcome stress and anxiety, addiction, depression, and actually really helped people find back to clarity and peace and mental health over and over again. And you can learn more about 3PDK on our website, 3pdk.org, and in our Facebook group, which is called Tre PDK, de Tre Principper Danmark. And now I want to welcome you, Erika Bugbee. Thank you so much for being here with us. We are very pleased that you want to do this webinar for us about teenagers and young adults and their parents. So thank you very much, and I'll give the word to you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. And I specialize in working with teenagers and young adults. I've been doing this 24 years now, and I was a fairly miserable teenager myself. So I think that's why it doesn't scare me working with teenagers who sometimes come in with a lot of emotion, anger, or they're sad, or awkward. Sometimes that puts off other adults, but I lived in that space myself, so it doesn't scare me. So what I thought I would do is just share one of the things that seems to be a topic that's been helpful for the parents, is sort of trending right now. And I work with a lot of parents as well as young adults, and the parents that are struggling with teenagers and young adults or little kids. And so I thought I would talk about just one of the insights my parents are having. So, but first, I'll talk a little bit about one of the things that I think I hear in all the parents, and I have teenagers myself, so this represents me too, is that there's sort of, in my mind, four things that parents are sort of looking for. I think all of them have in common. One is parents want to be close to their kids. I think sometimes when teenagers get troubled or they get into their teen years, they feel like they lose touch with them, and that scares parents. So I think I hear them saying, when my kid is troubled, I lose the closeness, and that's something I think they don't usually articulate it, but I can, that's what I hear. So they want to be close to them, and they also want them to be independent. They want their kids to grow up and be self-sufficient and come visit, but not need them. They also want them to be able to handle challenges and adversity on their own. And these last 2 points, the being independent and handling challenges and adversity and difficulty, often in your teen years, you don't see a lot of that. They don't look like they are fit to handle challenges and adversity. So, and parents can feel like they rely on them, or they're not quite independent enough to be out there in the world on their own, even though they're getting closer and closer to being out of the house. So parents get a lot of scared about how they're not really ready for life. And the fourth thing that I think parents want is essentially parents want to pass on something valuable and essential to their teens. They want to provide something for them. And oftentimes that's where people hear that, like things like the 3 principles, and they hear like they love it for themselves, but what they really want to do is give that to their kids. And if they had to pick, they would rather lose their own gifts of what they've gotten through, say, the 3 principles. If they could give it to their kids, they would do it. And so the reason I'm talking about these things is that there's something that I could see. There's some way that parents, there's sort of one asset or strength that parents have in them that allows them to do all of these things, to help parents feel close to their kids, to help kids be more independent, to help their kids be able to handle challenges, and to help parents pass something valuable on to their kids. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. In my mind, the most important thing that parents have going for them, even if they were inexperienced, like I was when I had kids. I didn't even really like kids when I had kids, honestly. I never babysat. I thought they were loud and messy and gross. But one thing that happened is I realized what parents have is instincts. We have this amazing set of instincts. And I want to talk about, in my mind, how that's like a second parent. For me as a parent, I feel like there's me and my life experience, and then there's my instincts. And fortunately, instincts exist. Otherwise, I don't know what my kids would look like, because my life experience and my experience even as a teenager was not very good in terms of raising kids. So in my mind, we have this incredible connection to something beyond our intellect that provides for us as parents that we can pass along as kids. And I'm going to suggest that the more people lead with their instincts, when the parenting gets difficult, the better we get at it. And when we lead with our intellect and the other stuff that we do when we parent, we get lost really fast. So I want to talk about what I mean by instincts, because everybody does it. Everybody has that. There's sort of like, I don't know if all these words will translate, but there's sort of a gut feeling that we use in life, in areas where we're able to sort of tune out the background noise and tune out, in a way, we're able to tune out our intellect and all the noise in our heads in a way that we do this in if you take it away from parenting, if parenting is a challenge for you, if you look in other areas of your life. So I have a group of practitioners I'm working with right now, a big group, and about half of the group says, oh, growing my practitioner practice. And back when I was a manager of a company, in my working life, it's easy. My decisions are easy. The difficult conversations are easy. Recovering from mistakes is easy. My instincts are right there in my working life. In my home life, my parenting, it's a big mess. I don't know what I'm doing. I overthink everything. I'm constantly making mistakes. I go to fix it. I make it worse. I'm lost pretty much 100% of the time in my parenting. And I love going to work as a result, because it's really easy. And what's funny is about the other half of this group, it's almost split 50-50. The other half of this practitioner group says exactly the opposite. They say, growing my business and my client work is really hard. It feels like I'm pushing a giant boulder up a hill. Parenting is so easy. I know exactly when to talk, when to shut up. I know when to give them space. I know when to lean in. I know when to be strict. I know when to be lenient. So there's, for the people listening, in your life, there's things you're good at that come easy to you. That's where your instincts live. So for some people, it's work. For some people, it's parenting. For some people, it's parenting one kid, but not the other. If you're good at cooking, you probably are using primarily instincts. I'm not. So if you come over to my house, you'll see a lot of overthinking and a lot of things being burned. My results are like, I don't know, I think I have like a 30% success rate, and I'm thinking the whole time. But for people that are really good at cooking, they can open the fridge, take out whatever's in there and make something amazing without any wear and tear and insecurity. If you ski, it's ski season over here. If you're good at a sport, you're using your instincts. You're not thinking about how fast, like when I ski, how fast the ground is going by and how much it'll hurt if I fall, and how fast people are going past me. Like, I don't like skiing because that's what I'm doing. It's just basically anxiety and worry the whole way down the hill. I don't even really like the chairlift. So everybody has, if you look, there's areas of your life where you're graceful and you make decisions easily. And it's enjoyable. And when you make mistakes, you correct well, you learn from them in the future, you make fewer of those mistakes as you go on. There's something informing us in the areas where we have natural talent, where we're naturally good. And the only difference between that area and the rest of the areas where you suck, that are hard, is the ratio of instincts to noise. It's not skill and it's not experience, and it's not how much is at stake or how much it matters. Because, you know, professional skiers, there's a huge amount at stake. But I don't know if you guys watched the Olympics, but you watch some of these people taking these jumps and they're so relaxed. They look like they just rolled out of bed and put on skis and went and took this jump. You can just tell their body is very at ease. And if you watch their face, you can see they're just nothing in there. So everyone has instincts. And the difference is that there's a way in which we understand and we trust instincts. We know how to find them. And we sort of, we show up. Essentially, listening to our instincts is just a matter of intentionally showing up. Kind of like, I don't know if you guys play tennis, who's played tennis out there, but when my daughter was learning tennis, there was sort of the ready position where you hit the ball over there and then you come back to the middle and you have your racket up, and there's a sort of ready position so that you're ready for them to hit it wherever. And in a way, we're doing that intentionally. If you cook, that's what you're doing. And you're good at it. If you ski, that's what you're sort of showing up moment to moment. And for the practitioners in this group I'm working with, the ones that show up, that find parenting easy, show up in parenting like that. The ones that find work easy show up and work. Each problem, they don't get caught in the blame. Is this my fault? Is this their fault? They just, what needs to happen? What do I do? And in a way, there's something we're intentionally doing when we listen to our instincts, that I'm suggesting you can borrow from whatever area of your life you live in the ready position when things go wrong, and import it into your raising kids. So I'm going to give you an example of what this looks like. So I have a parent that's her son, he's at home. I think he's maybe 19. He's just about to go off to college. Is just discovered drinking, and apparently loves it. Wants to do it all the time, and his friends want to do it all the time. And she said, she's worried about it because she shows up to this session the other day, and she's just got a head full of thinking about it. And so while I'm talking to her, I can hear essentially she has like mostly background noise and zero ideas and thoughts. She's about as far from the ready position as you can get with this problem. So basically, she has the background noise in her head is for her, it was, well, normally I talk to my kids. When I have a concern, I just go and I talk to them, but this is different because it's drinking and it's not legal and he's not supposed to be doing it. And in her household growing up, you just didn't talk about things that were not allowed. So if she and her brother were partying or staying out late or dating and they weren't supposed to be, the mom would know about it, but just wouldn't talk about it. She'd talk about other things like sex was fine to talk about, but you couldn't talk about drinking, doing badly in school. She just said, you need to get good grades and you can't drink. So there were certain topics that you just didn't talk about. And so she had this idea, well, if I talk about my concerns about drinking, am I condoning it? If I acknowledge it, does that mean that I'm saying it's okay or allowing it? That was sort of, her in her mind, was her mom's philosophy. She had the thought, well, if I don't want to be a nag and lose my connection to him, because I already can feel him sort of moving away from me, and I don't want to scare him off. And then she'd go into her imagination about, well, what if, this turns into a problem? Which is what a lot of parents do, is they see something happening, and in their mind, they fast forward 10, 20 years to the people they know where that's a huge problem. And this looks like, in a way, they're reacting to sort of how they do that age progression with photos. If somebody's missing, they show what they would look like in 20 years. There's some computer program, probably would make all of us look really bad if we used it, but it progresses people. In a way, parents live in that when they lose track of their instincts, is they've lost touch with their instincts because they're reacting to something that's not happening. It's going on in their imagination. And their level of upset, which is what happened to this woman, her level of upset was the size of a mom who's living with a kid with an alcohol problem. That's frankly half the parents I work with, that's all they're doing. Once I point it out, they like, oh, wait a minute, yeah, that's not, here's what's actually happening, and they get back in the ready position. Well, this mom had all this background noise. She had what I hear a lot of parents saying was basically grief of I've lost my kid. I used to have this kid that was sweet and around, and now he's gone all the time and he barely says hi and he's distracted. And, they sort of feel like they lost their kid. Like what happens when someone dies? They feel like my kid's gone and they're never coming back. It's not true, but it feels like that. So what happens is parents get lost in the background noise, which is understandable, but you want to come back from that, at least have some sense that you've left the room, which is essentially what happened in our conversation. Is she sort of talked and I was interested in, well, okay, so I that's how your mom did things and you don't want to be a nag. Well, what do you think you should do? What does your gut tell you to do? I don't remember how I said it, but basically I was asking her, well, what do you think we should do? I was like telling her how I handled it with my kids. That doesn't help because she has her kid and her arrangements. And she said, well, it sounds funny when I say that my mom didn't talk to us, because I think that's the stupidest approach. For me, that approach would make no sense. And frankly, it didn't work for us either. Because we were out drinking and driving, basically. And she said, I probably would have gotten a ride from her a couple of times, but I couldn't tell her I was drinking. So I'm out there, rather than talk to my mom, I'm in a car with someone who's drinking. So that was, and she said, so she's talking, and she says, and I don't have the kind of relationship where I just don't talk to my kids. Like I don't do that in any other area. Why would this be any different? And I know I'm not a nag. I know what a nag sounds like, and I'm really good at stopping myself. So just because I talk to my son about this doesn't mean I'm a nag. So basically what happened is she saw that her head was filled with all these fears. We have, I don't know, I think maybe we were talking 15 minutes because I said, well, what's on your mind? And all this came out. And what happened is, as soon as she talked and the noise came out of her head, what happened is her head cleared and she said, you know what it is? I'm not actually concerned with the drinking. I'm concerned with the drinking and driving, because I know that there's kids that come in, there's drinking, and then kids leave. And I don't want to be liable. And I don't want it on him either, that if something happens and they were partying at his house, he would have to live with that. And some family would have to live with that, and he would feel that. And it was really sweet. And she said, I just don't know. I didn't know what to do about that as a teenager. She said, I think, she didn't say this, but in my mind, her instincts were saying drinking and driving is a problem at that age. She said, it's awkward. People are getting in the car, so you just get in the car. So I said, well, can you talk to him about that? And she said, that's really the only thing. It's frankly the only concern I have. I trust that he'll experiment and figure out that you get hungover and it's not as fun as it looks. And you try it a bunch of times and it finds its place in your life like it does for adults. And frankly, if it turns into a problem, I'll handle it then. Right now, it's really just the drinking and driving. Now, actually, to take it a step further, what happened is I said, well, what do you want to, can you just say that? And she said, well, yeah, I thought I'd had it handled, because I said to him, like I always say, if you ever need a ride. Before it was just because he'd get stranded because the buses wouldn't run. And she said, well, now I think he knows that I know he's drinking. And what I mean is, if you're drinking and driving and you don't have a safe ride home, call me. She said, I don't know why I can't just tell him that. She said, the other thing is, he's not going to want his mom to come pick him up. She said, I'd love to work that out with them. And so I said, well, what other options are there? She said, well, I would pitch in gas money if one of their sober friends would be the designated driver. Maybe they could trade off. And she said, I'd pay for Ubers. And so, what was neat is that she said, I'm realizing that now that my mind has gotten quiet, the problem went from these 7 things and concerns to really just, when I got present, just one problem that's tactical. I actually have some ideas. And what's more, what I want to point out to you guys is she realized later in the conversation, I said, look, he might appreciate having you bring this to him because you had the same problem. She essentially, by getting quiet herself and getting out from under the fears, she say, all right, let me find my clarity. What problem am I concerned with? Or where should I start? Which is what she said. Let me get out from under the noise and see what makes sense today with this problem. Where the conversation went from there is what basically she's bringing to her son. Hey, drinking and driving was awkward for me. It might be awkward for you. I have some ideas. If she had that problem, I don't know about you guys, I had that problem. I had to decide, do I get in this car? Do I call my mom? I'm not going to call my mom. Like, she says she won't judge me. She's definitely judging me. And I don't want to hang out with my mom after a party. But no one's helping them think these things through. And to me, the gift here is that she has a chance to go to her kid, put a problem on the table that's somewhat controversial and say, here's a dilemma you might have. Let me help you with it. And here's some ideas. Which is exactly what happened. Is she went to him and said, look, I didn't want to talk about the drinking because I feel like somehow I'm endorsing it, which I don't, but I can't stop you. Frankly, I'd rather my kids didn't do anything risky, but I was a kid. I know that's not going to happen. So let me just talk to you about the drinking and driving part. And it was neat because they ended up having this sort of discussion where he said, well, Mom, I'm sorry, but no one's going to get in a car with you after a party. But we would take an Uber, but they're too expensive. So she said, well, I don't want to be driving everybody around. I don't want to be paying for that. But if you guys pitch in half, I'll pitch in the other half. If you pitch in half for gas money for a designated driver, I'll pitch in the other half. And she said, we had this conversation and she said, I got up, we had to leave the house and I got up and he came over and gave me a hug. And she said, I got our closeness back. And all I did was she realized I had left the building about him and his problems. And I was wandering around in my background noise and I wasn't in the ready position. And if I had been in the ready position, I would have been able to get to this point on my own. I would have come to him and said, look, I'm not worried about the drinking. Here's what I'm guessing you're having a problem with. I wanted to spell this out because, in the areas where we have the most grace and composure, if it's cooking or skiing or work or parenting, it looks like there's constantly problems to solve and adjustments to be made, but it looks like they come at us one at a time. Like I have this relative that doesn't live over there with you guys, so I'm assuming we'll never see this. It's sort of controversial in a lot of different ways, and I don't have a problem getting along with them. But in my mind, I know to just take on one thing at a time. So there might be an incident that needs to be discussed, and I'm usually the one that gets sent in to work it out. You know, you can't bring up politics at a table of 25 people when we only see each other every 3 years. And I knew I'll just put in the politics request. I'm not going to handle all the other things that happened in the last holiday. Let's just take one thing at a time. And when we have difficult situations with difficult people, there's a whole bunch of problems, but we know I'm just going to focus on this one. If you have good communication with a difficult person, it's because you do a lot of overlooking and a lot of, let me just see what makes sense and show up to one thing at a time. And when people let go of some of the background noise, the fears and the insecurities about parenting, like this mom did, what'll happen is you'll see, you know what, I don't know about these other things, but here's what makes sense first. And it will look like it went from chaos to order. Nothing changed, but your feeling calmed down. And when your feeling calms down, the human mind has a way of organizing itself. Life will appear to be disorganized and chaotic. And as soon as we calm down, we'll see one thing at a time. It's just how thought and feelings, they have this little relationship. When your feelings calm down, your thoughts calm down. I don't know which one comes first, actually, it doesn't matter, but they sort of go together. And generally, we're able to take some ownership of how we're doing in terms of our feelings, how calm we are in the areas where we do well. We seem to know, like if you're somebody that operates well in crisis or under deadlines, not everybody's like that, but if you're one of those people, it's because you know when you start to get agitated, no, I'm not doing that. If you're somebody that skis well and you start to get freaked out because it's icy conditions, how much you'd hurt yourself, your mind will say, no, don't do that. And I'm suggesting in parenting, if we were a little bit more awake to how much noise versus quiet there is, and we committed ourselves to showing up more often to all right, let me just get present to the problem that's actually happening, that your mind will cooperate with you and your instincts will come back. Now I'm going to tie that into how we pass that on to your kids. But first, I wanted to stop and see, how is this making sense? Are you, what thoughts do you have? Questions?
Thank you so much, Erika. It's making a lot of sense. Do any of you have any questions or comments? Og hvis I vil have hjælp til at oversætte noget, så kan I sagtens sige det på dansk, så kan jeg oversætte det for jer. I just said that if anybody wants to ask a question in Danish, they can do so and we can translate it.
Right. And I could talk about this for 3 weeks straight, so they don't have to have questions.
It doesn't seem like there is any questions right now, so
No problem.
maybe you should just go ahead, Erika.
Yeah. Now, let me in my mind, this mom that I talked to, by going and talking to her son, not only did she get his partnership in solving her concerns about the drinking and driving and help him, but she basically brought a feeling of openness and presence to an issue that most adults are not open and present about when they talk to teenagers. And frankly, any problem that an adult feels compelled to go talk to a teenager about, they're not doing it from a feeling of openness and presence. And let's have a discussion. They're generally filled with judgment, concern, they're freaked out, they're intense, they're bossy and controlling. They're telling them how to think. How about you guys? That's how my life was as a teenager. People don't really think you know what you're doing in there. And ironically, if they're having to tell you about something, because it's a problem, if they're having to address it, I've already experienced a whole bunch of it. So I'm much more, teenagers generally are twice as experienced in whatever issues you think they don't know what they're talking about. So when it comes to, by the time you go talk to them about drinking or drugs or grades or vaping, they already have a bunch of experience. So now what's different, and the reason that the teenagers I work with are so open, they'll ask me questions like, how do you know if you're addicted to vaping? How do you know how much, if you're going to become an alcoholic? Should I care about school or not? Like, the kinds of questions they ask are just, they're so open. The reason they're so open is because I'm open with them, and I figure this is an equal partnership. And that's what this mom did, is she basically went and said, look, I'm not going to tell you not to drink and drive, because my mom, basically, that was her approach: don't drink. But here's some ideas in case drinking and driving is a concern for you. So if it is, which it might not be, but if it is, and you want another way, I came up with a couple of ideas, because that's what I was worried about. And she left space for him to say, no, I'm good. Drinking and driving is not a concern for me. We haven't gotten into an accident so far. I feel like as long as we pay attention, we're good. She was kind of willing to let him have his take. And I think that, in my mind, is something that teenagers don't get a lot of. They don't get a lot of, essentially, space to reflect on things. So the client I just talked to this morning, she has a friend who's her best friend. They've been really tight. All of a sudden, she doesn't hear from her anymore because she's dating this new guy, and he's kind of maybe not such a bad guy, not such a good guy. And she's missing school. She doesn't go to sports practice. She's missing practices. She almost missed the SATs on Saturday. All of a sudden, she doesn't call her friends anymore, and she's worried about her. And I had sort of a similar conversation with the parents of, well, what do you think you should do? What makes sense to you? And, she had all this concern and judgment and was mad at her and felt abandoned. And then, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 minutes into just letting her air her thoughts. And I said, well, do you want to do anything about it? What do you think? She said, I'm just sad. I'm scared for her, and I'm sad. And I said, all right, well, you don't have to do anything with that. I mean, you could tell her that if you want, but you don't have to solve it. You can just, that's relatable. You can be sad. And she said, well, yeah, I guess I could just tell her I'm sad. I don't want her to call me because I'm being whiny. I don't want her to stop seeing this guy or to feel like, but what was neat is that I gave her the space to have all the reactions she wanted. And then I was interested in, all right, so now that those are out in the open, what do you want to do? And in my mind, I was asking her what her instincts had to say. And that's what happens to us. You know how you want to sometimes you have a bad experience at like a restaurant or somewhere, and you want to leave a bad review or chew them out, and you sort of let it sit. And at some point you decide either to do something about it or not. But I find, when we have time to calm down, a different side of us comes out that has something more intelligent to say. And often the first batch of thoughts we have that comes out of our upset and our emotion is not great. And that's, to me, what getting out from under the background noise and getting in the ready position is you sort of recover from wherever your emotions are going, and you ask yourself, all right, what makes sense now? And that's basically, if you're a practitioner like me, that's what you get paid for. You don't even have to tell people what to do. They have to, just like adults, teenagers have to find their own answers anyway. They don't really care about my life experience. But what I'm interested in is, well, what do you think? What makes sense for you? And we have a chance to get out from under the reactions that people have to life, to the problems that teenagers have, like they're drinking, like this woman's son had been addicted to weed and had been dropping out of school. 2 separate incidences. And she handled them both the same way, which was, she got really freaked out. She had the thought of not doing anything because she was terrified and didn't want to make it worse, to getting in there and controlling the whole thing and making it worse by her standards. And she said, I ended up letting all of that pass and then coming back and saying, I'm just going to go talk to him. And she did. And in both situations, she talked to him. She didn't really know what to tell him. She just said, look, I'm concerned about your grades. Are you concerned? Had a dialogue with him. And then left. And in both situations, he ended up at some point giving her a hug randomly in the few days after that. And within a few months, both situations got back on track. And I'm suggesting that she's essentially passing on the ability to get out from under the noise and get herself back in the ready position, which means you basically intentionally break up with your fears and all the emotion that you're able to somehow ignore in the areas where you do gracefully, like sports, cooking, difficult in-laws, is that you're able to keep your head clear and sort of look and see what makes sense in a way you're present, in a way that maybe you're not in the areas where you don't do as well. So if you're somebody that parenting comes easily and work is difficult, my guess is your head is full of stuff at work. And in parenting, it gets full, but you know it, you clear it out. You look at, all right, well, never mind that, what makes sense here? We have some way of telling from our feelings whether we're calm or not. And in the areas where we do well, we seem to have self-awareness to know when we need to calm down and come back to center. And the areas where we don't do well, I think we sort of lose the plot. We get caught in the problem enough, and we forget that we're ourselves are not calm. Yeah, Simon.
Hello, Erika. Yeah, it just dawned on me that like I see my two sons every second weekend. They are 7 and 13, and I never wanted to be alone with them, but that's how life turned out. So I'm alone every second weekend, and especially with my 13-year-old, I have this feeling that I lost contact with him, and I feel stuck about it. Yeah, and so I thought, let me say it out loud and see if you have some thoughts about that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm glad, sorry. I'm glad you said that, because it's a really common experience to feel like close to a kid, and then age happens, a little bit of age happens, and all of a sudden it's like you're in the house with somebody else's kid. It's like the neighbor's kid came over and moved in. It feels like they're a foreign body in your house. And in a way, you want to forget about your history and who they used to be and what happened and all the meaning. If you can, forget about all the meaning you make out of that, whether they're going to come back or not, why they disappeared. If you can, you don't have to get rid of it forever, but if you can put that in the next room and look at them as, here's a person I don't really even know, and start fresh with them as if they're a stranger. You're traveling to a foreign country, you're lodging with some family, and here's your 13-year-old. Your ability to get to know a 13-year-old is pretty good. We're not great. We're all a little bit awkward with 13-year-olds because they're so awkward oftentimes that it can be off-putting or uncomfortable. But if you don't have a bunch of thinking about you and them and whether you're moving the dial, are we making progress, it's not working, if you can essentially just get to know them without any of the investment and the caring. I know sounds funny because it's your own kid, but honestly, our social skills, I don't even know you, but your social skills, even if you're an awkward social skills person, are still good enough to get to know a 13-year-old. It's the only thing that we do with people when we get to know them, if it's somebody else's 13-year-old, is we just have this we show up hoping to come up with something to say, and then just, I don't know, throw stuff at it and see what sticks. Do you like movies? Oh, I see you've got those shoes. Like you kind of hang in there and you see what happens, the way that people do when they open the fridge and cook something. You show up and then you wait for something to happen. And because we were in our biology, we're social creatures. You don't have to come up with anything. Your creative process, because you're a social creature, will give you, you're born with a creative process where humanity is concerned. So your mind will come up with if you don't get discouraged and you hang in there, your mind will come up with things. You'll be listening to him to see what he's interested in. And then you'll look at, of the things he's interested in, there might be 2 things that he's interested in, 58 things that you're not interested in. But of the 2 things he's interested in, you might find, oh, I could watch that movie, or we both like Vietnamese soup. You know, you'd be looking for what you can work with, in the same way that I have to do that with my difficult in-law. I'm ignoring all this stuff I can't work with, and I just look at the one thing I can. Does that make sense? You ever do that? You know, when you travel, you ever done that before?
Oh, yeah.
You find ways of connecting to people where you barely speak a common language and you have barely anything in common, yet you find what that is within a matter of minutes.
Yeah. Thank you. I got something to think about, because
That makes sense. Yeah.
to pop out of that stuckness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not easy, because I'm asking you to turn your back, or just to experiment with turning your back on the noise, like I was telling this mom.
Yeah, I can get that.
It's a lot. It's not like you're turning your back on the noise when you're at a restaurant. It's the people behind you. The noise is all very, your fears, and your worrying about if you're going to get your connection back. It's scary. You might lose track of the most important thing you have. So to turn your back on the future of that, and the willingness to sort of let go of the past, you're not actually giving it up, but in the moment you are. In the same way that if you ski, you are kind of turning your back on the risk of maybe dying or getting maimed, so it's, but if we didn't have the goods that we are wired into in terms of our instincts to navigate when our mind is quiet, then we'd be putting ourselves at risk. But the human mind, I have so much confidence, and we have so much confidence that it provides, that we're willing to not think about risk while we're skiing at high speeds. And that's what you'd be using.
Yeah, I get that. I will try it out.
Good.
Thanks.
Good question. Thank you.
I was just wondering a thing, if there's nobody else who has a question. Well, what I was wondering is that I love how you talk about wisdom, you call it instincts and gut feeling. And I love that, because that those are concepts that we use in our everyday language, right?
Yeah.
But in the 3 principles conversation, it's always, or it's often called wisdom, and it sounds like something that you might not think that you have yourself, right?
Right.
But we all know that we have instincts, and we all know that we have a gut feeling, because we all experience that in some areas of our lives.
Right.
But could you just say a few words about, what about the areas where we don't feel that we have instincts, or we don't feel them as present as we do in other areas? Like if it's in parenting that we feel that I have no idea what I'm doing here, how can we, is there any way that we can get more in touch with that instinct? Because I'm sure that we all have instincts for parenting, and we all have instincts for probably most things in life, right? We just learn how to get in touch with them.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what I did, because I was really careful. I didn't want to read a bunch of parenting books, when I knew, all right, I got to come up with something else. I need some new material for this problem, because I've used up all my ideas. And you hope, I don't know, I find if I just throw a bunch of stuff at something, they either, eventually they grow out of it or something works. But when I needed more, for me, I was interested. I would find other parents that were calmer, and in my mind, that weren't worried and afraid. I was looking for parents that had more faith than I had. And that's how I found that's where I found my wisdom. So I had a neighbor that had 9 kids and homeschooled all of them. And so she was around all the time. And so I would call her up, and she wasn't in the principles. She would just, but it was, I rarely used her suggestions when it came to things, but I found that she sort of saw everything so lightly and nothing bothered her. And whatever it was, she had a kid that had that problem and now they're fine. And even if they had the problem at the same time in the same age kid, she didn't have any concerns about that it would sort itself out. And now it's not that she didn't have problems that, that persisted, but she just handled them. And in a way, I'm interested. It's a funny thing. It's not, I don't even call her so much anymore, but I know if I were to call her, she would have reassurance before we solve the problem. And because I know that's possible, that's the feeling I'm listening for. I know the ready position I'm looking for, and I know when I haven't found it yet. And sometimes in parenting, we don't get that reassurance until a few years later. And we realize, I was afraid for nothing, or I wasn't going to be able to fix that problem anyway. They had to figure that out themselves. And sometimes you don't get that clarity until later. Oftentimes that's the bummer about parenting, is it's not until retrospect that you get all this ideas about how to handle it and what to let go and what to, and that's sort of the tragedy of it. If it somehow we can reverse that. But I find reassurance in the fact that, I'm sure there's an answer here. And I'm either freaked out for no reason or I'm missing the obvious, and it will sort itself out. And I will forgive myself that I didn't know any better and I made a big deal out of nothing, or I completely missed handling something until it was a giant problem. There's a way in which I'm okay with the messiness of that. That's what I got from my neighbor Bart. She's sort of, nothing bothers her. All of it is just, that's the fun of having kids in her mind. And the discomfort of not knowing what was going to happen and not knowing what to do, and the clumsiness and making things worse, in my mind, is part of the ride, parenting. And if you can get comfortable with that, not knowing what you're doing and that it's a little bit messy, the way that we do with skiing and cooking, you forgive your mistakes. You have a philosophy that has mistakes built into it. And to me, that calms my mind down. And I do tend to get more answers when I'm okay with not knowing what I'm doing and not having any answers. And when I don't get answers, I'm okay with that too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Erika. I can see Casper has one question. Do you have time for just one more question?
I was just going to say I do. I don't have a hard stop. I have a break after this.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, Casper, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Erika. So
hey.
Now this, maybe it's a little personal, but I'm very curious about how you experienced growing up with parents that are working with the principles, because I think there are not so many of you yet, but I think there will be a lot in the future.
We're making more right now.
Yeah.
Right. But
so just, did you experience looking at your parents and thinking, oh, these are it's quite a different way to do it than your friends from school, for example.
Yeah, I didn't initially. I didn't. They just look like parents, and they. But I did, as you know, in my teen years, when I started spending time at other people's houses, I could tell, oh, other people, other parents get mad at their kids, or the kids get mad at their parents. They'll be mad for like 3 days. Not that we didn't, we had arguments, and I would get bothered and in a huff and upset, and I cried all the time. It was, for about 1.5 years. But I didn't. The fact that we didn't, there wasn't all the noise in our system. It was chronic. So we would get upset, but we let go of it. And the next day was as if it hadn't happened. And sometimes we'd end up, there'd be something to talk about. And oftentimes there was nothing. It was after school and you talked to me too soon. Or I pestered you too much and you were in a bad mood. So I noticed that there was more drama that sort of would take on a life of its own. And they weren't okay with the messiness. They get mad at each other, hold it against each other, because they were messy. And in our house, it was sort of a mess was just part of the scene. But the other thing that I noticed is that, and this is what's funny, in my house, George, so my dad is George Pransky. I don't know if you guys know. Well, my parents teach the principles and been around a long time. And George was totally comfortable with my moods and my surliness. And I got really dark and withdrawn, and I'd go months without saying anything to them. And I just wanted to be left alone with my music and my dog. And my dad was totally comfortable with that. And I'd come out after 3 months of being in my room, and he'd be in the kitchen, be like, hey, what are you doing? You want to go down, walk the track? Do you want to go? Hey, I was just going to go drive and pick something up. You want to come with me? And usually my answer was no, but every once in a while I'd say, oh, okay. And it was as if I saw him the day before. So my moods did not bother him at all. Now, he would call me out on things sometimes and say, look, if you're going to hang around these people, these new friends of yours that are, rude to parents and unpleasant, that's fine, but you can't come home and then be like that. He'd sort of tap me on the shoulder every once in a while and say, hey, you've crossed a line. Now, my Linda, who's my mom, she's my stepmom, but she's been in my life since I was 4. My moods freaked her out. Partly because everybody in the principles was in such a nice feeling. And then I came along and which in a way was harder for me because I didn't know anybody that was like me. So it was made my moods a little bit louder, but Linda didn't know what to do with them and was essentially kind of scared of me and either judgy or upset by it or get her feelings hurt. And we had to kind of work that out. So took her a few years to come around and see that I was going through something and it wasn't personal, and that we'd get our relationship back at some point when I felt like it. And she had to sort of have a learning curve about it. And I had to kind of, put up with her, in the same way she had to kind of put up with me. So in a way, I'm glad you asked that, because I think a lot of people feel like they have to be 100% like George and they can't be like Linda. And in my mind, I don't know, there's some people where we see it's just their thinking and they don't mean it. With certain difficult relatives and other difficult relatives, we get offended and upset, and it's not on you to be graceful all the time. So in my mind, there's certain areas where the principles and seeing thought really helps us. And there's other areas where we get lost in the noise, just like everybody else. And then we're not very helpful to our kids or the people that we're around, or to work, or growing a business. That, if sometimes you're the Linda in the equation, and, that's half the time for me too. Areas where things come really easy and I see my instincts, in areas that they don't. So in that sense, my life was so much more stable, had so much less drama and noise, and so much more love, because we come back to that so much more often than in my friends' houses. But we get lost too, just like everybody else.
Yeah,
Good.
Thank you.
Good. Thank you for asking that. I do get questions. Do we sit around and talk about the principles? No, we didn't. I wanted, even when I was troubled, I wanted nothing to do with the principles or listening to Sid Banks tapes. I didn't want any help. I didn't want to change how I felt. I wanted to be left alone. And I made sure through my makeup and my clothes and my behavior and my body language that they knew that I wanted to be left alone. And I found my own way out of it when I was ready, and not a minute before. So in a way, I think the principles, if you're a parent, the best thing you could do is just find your way back when you get lost. And if it looks like you have to help your kid, save them or fix them, you're probably just lost, and yourself. So it should look like they're completely intact over there. And if they don't, it's your eyes and not your kid and their behavior. Any other questions or anything else I can answer before we sign off?
I think that last remark that you just made is so important, right? That if we think that there's something wrong over there with the other person, whether it's a kid or it's your spouse or your boss at work or whatever, you know that that's wrong, right? You should go back and look at what is going on with yourself.
Yeah, because it's not that there aren't troubled people in our lives, and it might be your teenager, but it's so interesting. I find there's some way in which we understand things like alcoholism and going to rehab. People sort of understand that, well, you can't really help a drug addict, somebody who's an alcoholic, until they're ready. And I think that's just a more visible process, because people tried rehab a bunch of times, and they will say themselves, I've had my friends say, look, you were never going to help me until I was ready. And we're all that way. Alcoholism and drug addiction is just easier to see. It plays out sort of on the outside. But, I'm not going to let go of a grudge until I'm ready to let go of the grudge. And no one's helping me. No one's going to change my mind about things I stress about or things I worry about. And it doesn't matter how fancy your degree is, or whether you're an amazing 3 principles practitioner, or whether you had an epiphany. You could be standing right next to a troubled person. And it doesn't, you want to appreciate, people find their way. We find our way when we're ready. And it's always on schedule. It might not be on your schedule for them, but the things we're struggling with right now, they just had to play out. And in 10 years, we'll look back and we'll have let go of some of them, and we'll realize, oh, I had to go through that so I could see this, or I wasn't going to get there until I had that moment. And that moment is just waiting inside you to come out. And at some point it will, when you're in a year or 5 years, or, you know, maybe you're one of those people where you have your big moment, you know, in the last year of your life. It doesn't matter. You're going to go to the grave messy. So what difference does it make if you're like this messy or this messy? And if you can feel that way about your kids, you just relax and enjoy them. And if they're struggling, just, you know, love them and share about your own messiness if you want, but otherwise you just, you know, just be in their corner, like that woman I talked about earlier.
Thank you so much, Erika, for this webinar for us here.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for all the great comments and questions, and for your comment. And thank you for the opportunity to do this. It's nice that you're out there putting these videos out there and finding out what topics people want and bringing in people.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, and teenagers and kids, that is really one of the hottest topics in Denmark.
It's funny, I was in business with, I know we're going over, so you guys sign off if you want. I'll just say one more thing. I was in business for 20 years with my parents, teaching the principles, and I thought, it's time to do something different. I'm going to go off on my own and start my own practice, which is what Sid was always trying to get us to do. A whole bunch of us collected in this part of outside of Seattle, a whole bunch of principles practitioners, and he used to get mad at us that we should all go out and start our own things, but we liked hanging out together anyway. So I went and just felt like it's time for a change, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do, but I knew I wanted to work with teenagers and parents, and so I thought, well, I'll start there. And all of a sudden my practice got full, and now that's all I do. It's the need is so gigantic. It was, I kind of laugh because I come out of my home office. I go sit down to dinner, and my husband, I'd say, it's raining teenagers. Yeah. So I ended up, now I train practitioners to work with teenagers because there's so few people that want to be in a room with teenagers. And in my mind, there's nobody more fun to work with than a teenager. There's you never know what's going to come out of their mouth, and they learn so fast. If it was teenagers running the world, the principals would be in schools, prisons, it'd be everywhere. It just it's amazing how much clarity, and they just, I don't know, they see something, and all of a sudden they've changed their friend group. The way they do school is different. Nobody changes faster than a teenager.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's best business to be in my mind. But anyway, thank you for having me, and for you guys, all of your interest. And
yeah, and thank you so much for sharing this. It was really lovely to have you here. Thank you, Erika.
Yeah, good. All right, thanks you guys. Have a nice evening.
Everybody for being here.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.